Welcome to the Pivot Clean Energy Podcast, How the World Cooks, the energy shift you need to know about. I'm your host, Alicia Elmamuni. On this podcast, we are going to explore everything cooking, how it impacts the world, and why you should care. Let's go. Tony Lighting is the president of Trenton Agri-Products LLC in Trenton, Nebraska. Prior to entering the renewable fuels industry, he was a captain in the United States Army. During his time in the Army, he was a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter pilot and did tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan. He holds a degree in finance from Iowa State University, a Master of Business Administration from the University of Mary, and a Master of Science in Energy Management from the University of Colorado. He's currently the president of Renewable Fuels Nebraska and is a board member and serves on the executive committee of the Renewable Fuels Association. Today, Tony is going to walk us through what the bioethanol sector looks like in North America. We will get a crash course on bioethanol production at the plant level and learn all about the amazing co-products that are also realized through bioethanol production. We will also learn about the volumes produced for the North American market, how much of that stays in the country, how much is exported, and where all of that fuel and co-products ultimately end up. Tony shares his vision for the future of biofuels in North America and the potential it holds to benefit the rest of the world. During his service in Afghanistan and Iraq, Tony noticed the pollution caused by cooking practices and poor quality fuel and sees a window of opportunity for bioethanol to impact these areas as well around the world, creating a better quality of life in emerging markets. Join us as we explore the biggest bioethanol market in the world and the opportunity that comes with that market. Tony, so excited to have you join us on How the World Cooks today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and look forward to talking about all the North American questions that you have.
Yeah, so we're just heading toward the end of a series that we're doing on bioethanol around the world. And we've been looking at feedstocks, demand, policies, and more. And so we've looked at South America, Europe, Asia. And so today we're going to look at North America. So we're really looking forward to having you on the show and sharing your expertise.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So you are the president of Trenton Agri-Products LLC, and you're based out of Wichita, Kansas. Can you give us a little insight on what Trenton Agri-Products is?
Certainly. So Trenton Agri Products is we're a 50 million gallon ethanol plant. While our headquarters is in Wichita, Kansas, our facility is located in southwestern Nebraska. And we began production in March of 2004. So we're actually just a few weeks shy of our 20-year anniversary.
Wow,
Yeah,
congrats.
thank you. And we started out as a 30 to 40 million gallon plant, and we've since expanded to just over 50 million gallons per year.
Wow.
Um, we've been in continuous operation since '04. We've had the same ownership since the day we started, and um, and we still have some legacy employees, which is really pretty
Wow.
awesome. Um, we produce ethanol. We produce primarily wet distillers grains for cattle feed, and then we do a little bit of dried distillers grains, and we do corn oil as well.
Okay, so you're putting out multiple products from Trenton.
Yes.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the position where you're at today?
Yeah, definitely. Some of it's a little bit of fate and luck. I don't think many people, especially, 5, 10 years ago, determined to go into the ethanol industry. But before this, I was an Army officer, and my wife was from Wichita, Kansas, so we were married, and that's what brought us back to Wichita specifically. But leaving the Army, I really wanted to find a job with a purpose, and
Mm.
so I did a lot of searching and interviewing, and two things became readily apparent. One, the energy industry, it really appealed to me. And then specifically the ethanol industry, I went to school for finance, and then I grew up on a small farm in southern Minnesota. So it was just a perfect blend of agribusiness and also being able to be near farmers, which is something that's near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, that's great that you could kind of come back to your roots and be in a position that allows you to work on a day-to-day basis with farmers.
Definitely.
So Trenton Agri Products is in Kansas, but the actual plant's in Nebraska. What's your geographical reach in terms of like where does your product go?
Yeah, it's pretty impressive, and I'll speak to our plant specifically, but just all these plants that are located primarily in small communities across mainly the Midwest, and just the national and international reach they have. Our plant specifically, located on the far western reaches of the Corn Belt, we send a lot of ethanol by rail. We've been a California shipper since early on.
Mm.
We can ship to Oregon and we ship a little bit to Washington State. And then we also send some ethanol to Colorado, Wyoming, and here in Nebraska as well. Um, Interestingly, our corn oil, it goes nationwide. It can be anywhere
Mm.
from the Gulf Coast to out west to farms here in the Midwest. And then our distiller grains primarily gets fed to cattle within 70 miles. And if you were to do a search how many cattle are on feed in Nebraska and specifically Western Nebraska, you would see why that's a great fit. There's a bunch of cattle on feed, and we have a great partnership with our feedlots. So while we're in a small community of a couple hundred people, we have a what we feel a national reach, and it's something we're very proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very impressive. Just for our listeners, can you describe where the corn oil is actually being used? What other products is that going into?
Yeah, so corn oil has a couple primary uses, but it can either go into animal feed as a nice fat binder to go with the distiller grains and the ration. Ours typically goes to cattle feeding, but it can also go out to poultry and other uses. And then interestingly, it's a great feedstock for renewable diesel and biodiesel.
Hmm.
So it can also go, they both go into renewable products, either animal feed or creating another fuel.
Wow, that's great. Bioethanol, like you mentioned, has multiple feedstocks, multiple end uses. You guys are producing a number of those at your plant. For those who have never been to a production facility, can you just do a quick tour of the plant and the bioethanol process and co-products?
Certainly. So I'm a business guy, so I'm going to approach this from a very high level.
Perfect.
And really before I go into the process, I want to note that while this is coming coming from a high level, our employees and employees across the ethanol industry, they do great things every day. They're tough, smart, and mission focused. So what I say here is very simplified, but what they do is very complex and
Mm.
impressive each and every day to make these facilities go. But from a
And these
very
are
general
24-hour facilities, right? I mean, they never stop running, so you have to have somebody there all the time.
Yeah, 24/7, 365, Christmas Eve, Thanksgiving
Yeah,
Day, weekends, kids' birthdays, these guys are doing it. So,
yeah.
excuse me. So from a very high level, basically you take a kernel of corn, in our instance, you're going to mill it into flour, and then you're going to add some water, and you're going to add some enzymes, and you create a liquidy mixture called slurry. And what you're going to do then is that's called the front end, and the enzymes break down all the starch that's in the corn into kind of usable starches and sugars. And then that solution becomes what's called a mash. And mash goes into fermentation. So just like your favorite brewery,
Hmm.
we also ferment. And in fermentation, you feed yeast and some other enzymes, and you take those sugars and you convert them into alcohol. And then byproducts are heat and CO2. So you create alcohol, heat, and CO2 with fermentation. Once fermentation's complete, you have a solution. We call it beer, just like what you'd see in a normal domestic brewery. And this is where the ethanol plant splits. So the beer that you get, I always say it's at distillation where the plant splits. And you take the can of Miller Lite, for a lack of better word, and you bring the alcohol out of the top and you bring the rest out of the bottom. And so the alcohol that comes out of the top, we further dehydrate it, and then it becomes what you see as ethanol in the fuel form, 200 proof that can be in fuel, industrial uses, and others. Um, the lesser known part of the plant, and this is where I think our story, we really continue to work hard to tell it, is everything that isn't the alcohol in the can of Miller Lite goes out the bottom of the distillation columns, and then it's sent to the what's called the back end of the plant, and through varying heat, flowing, separation with high rotating equipment, we separate that into the different co-products that you see, including distillers grains, corn oil, and others. So that's a very simplified version. I'd encourage anyone to take a tour of their plant. Our industry is pretty open door. We love to have
Hmm.
visitors, but any questions on that very broad overview?
No, I really love that. It was very simple, very easy to understand. I think that's really helpful for listeners that have never been to an actual plant. Um,
Certainly.
so you mentioned corn, and that's what your plant is using. Is that the primary feedstock used across North America for bioethanol production?
Yeah, mostly. I mean, you're going to see a few random feedstocks, but primarily corn is the king. In Kansas and Texas, and even in our region, you're going to see some sorghum usage.
Mm.
And that kind of ebbs and flows year on year, but definitely corn and then some sorghum is what we primarily see in here in North America.
And is that area, the middle part of the US, the primary area for production, or what are the prime states and areas in the US that are currently involved in high volumes of production?
Yeah, the high volume is going to be the Midwest and then the Plains states. So, where you see corn growing, there are a few destination plants where the corn will go to a coastal region, but I would say those are the exception, and the vast majority of ethanol production happens where the corn's being grown.
Hmm. And from a logistical standpoint, can you just elaborate on why that's important?
Yeah, definitely. So corn is, it's heavy. There's quite a bit of water in the corn, and so to transport it, it becomes very expensive. It's also, weather dependent. So
Mm.
if you live in the community, it's much easier. And then what we view as essential is just having the relationships with the local producers and co-ops,
Hmm.
and that way we can work with them. They feel like they're invested in our business. We feel very invested in their business. So you have this mutual respect, and each other's successes drives with one another. So I think just the sense of community really helps that really flow.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. You talked about the co-products, and I want to spend a little bit of time here because I think it's really important to see that from all of this corn production, you're not just getting one product, you're getting multiple products, and the industry has been really good about diversifying and continuing to innovate around different technologies. And so you mentioned at your plant you put out wet distillers grains, dried distillers grains, corn oil. Are there other co-products that you can get from an ethanol plant?
Yeah, certainly. So we're a dry mill ethanol process. So we have, dry flour going in. There's also wet mills out there, and there's several. They make a product called corn gluten, which
Hmm.
is also a high protein feed, and that's an excellent source of animal feed. And they have a whole other assortment of products. Another one that you hear a lot of in the news is CO2.
Hmm.
And our CO2, it's biogenic and it's very pure. And so currently a lot of facilities use it in industrial processes and to make dry ice. I think we achieved some notoriety across our industry with the dry ice production during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's a ton of opportunities with capture, utilization, and sequestration that we see starting to happen today and going on the horizon. And just going back on distiller grains as well, in general, they come in many varying degrees and forms, but we take that kernel of corn and we break it down into something that's really digestible and it's high protein. So when the animal, in our case, it's cattle and through the rumen, it can really digest that protein well.
Hmm.
And there's the moisture goes with it. And so it really helps livestock operations, which helps our food supply. And so, I'd be remiss if I didn't discuss this, but these co-products, we need them. They're an integral part of our business, but it
Mm-hmm.
also just really debunks the bogus myth of food versus fuel. Ethanol production is a creation of what I'd say it's high protein food and high octane fuel.
Mm-hmm.
And the world is short on protein, and we're helping with this shortage through our co-products.
Yeah, for sure. And so you guys are putting most of it into the cattle market, but what other livestock markets is this going into?
Yeah, dried distiller grain, it can go into the poultry market, it can go into the swine market. There's facilities out there creating higher concentrated protein feed that's going into aquaculture,
Hmm.
which is a huge source of food and protein across the world. And a lot of the distiller grains has the ability to be exported, and we do export.
Okay.
I want to say it's something like 1/3 of our co-products are distillers grains internationally. So we're definitely continuing to help feed the world as part of the value-added agriculture.
Hmm. Yeah. And then what's the difference between the wet distiller's grains and the dry distiller's grains?
Yeah, so the wet distillers grains essentially, once you separate the solids and the liquids in the plant, instead of running that solid separation through a dryer and drying it down to about 10% moisture, the wet distillers grains go straight out to what we call a wet cake pad. It's a collection facility, and it's about 65% moisture. And because we feed it so closely to cattle feedlots, we don't have to use the extra drying and
Hmm.
energy to dry it. And then that moisture, along with the protein in the wet cake or wet feed, digests very well with the cattle, and it's a good feed binder.
Hmm. So a lot of these farmers in your area are probably bringing you their grain and then coming back to pick up wet cake for their cattle.
Definitely, we have a number of customers that, yeah, we definitely are. We're a customer and they're a customer, and it's a
Hmm.
great just a great value chain and a great story overall.
Yeah, it's a great relationship. Really, really has benefited rural America, especially in the Midwest where the production is high.
For sure, it's interesting to bring that up. The farm I grew up on in southern Minnesota, um, which isn't too far from you guys in Sioux Falls, but there's a ton of corn that's produced, and in the 90s and early 2000s, there wasn't a lot of markets nearby for that corn,
Hmm.
and the ethanol industry has changed that market and markets like it across the world. Just adding value to the farmers and keeping the farm gate, alive and economic. So it's
Hmm.
really a fantastic deal for rural America.
Yeah, and to that point, we're going to talk a little bit about clean cooking here. But that's also a benefit as countries around the world begin to grow their bioeconomy, is looking at how they increase their agricultural potential to benefit their rural economies and make some of their own local production that they can benefit from.
Definitely. I mean, I think, food security is paramount. And we're lucky here in the United States. Our founders and policymakers for years decided, centuries ago that food security is paramount. Many other countries do not enjoy that. I think myself included, and I'm in the production of feed. Sometimes we maybe take it for granted, but we have to have our own food security and then
Hmm.
have products here that can add value versus just sending the raw outputs elsewhere to add value is really key to continue to make that economy strong.
Exactly. Yeah, it'll be exciting to see how the rest of the world begins to catch on to that idea, particularly in areas like sub-Saharan Africa.
Definitely.
So you touched on exports. Let's talk a little bit about the actual bioethanol production that stays here in North America versus how much we export. Do you have any numbers around that?
Yeah, in terms of for ethanol, I went and looked this up, and there's a lot of great stats out there. Mine came from the Renewable Fuels Association annual report. So this is all 2023 numbers, but
Okay.
in 2023 we produced just over 15.5 billion gallons of ethanol, and we exported around 9% or just above 1.4 billion gallons. So
Wow.
it was a great export year. I think our exports are going to continue to certainly stay on pace or grow over time as our product is adopted across the world. Our biggest export partner is Canada,
Hmm.
and then the United Kingdom and European Union, second and third respectively. And then we have a ton of other customers: Mexico, Southeastern Asia, Middle East even. So we definitely have a lot of global partners. Um, and then kind of, usage of that, the majority of it's transportation fuel.
Hmm.
We've seen a lot more production of industrial alcohol and even grain neutral spirits, which is kind of fun and exciting for our industry. And then there's a goal of trying to use ethanol as a feedstock for sustainable aviation fuel. And
Hmm.
I think there's just a lot of great opportunities. Our work is to tell our story, let people know that we are renewable, and it's truly we are good for the land. There's some negative myths, in my opinion, out there about what we do, but when you really get down and look at our carbon intensity and the sustainability of our product, we're a home run every time.
Yeah, so when you're talking about bioethanol in fuel, we're typically looking at E10, right? A 10% blend in your fuel. But are there higher volume ethanol blends in North America? What are those? What does that look like?
Yeah, certainly. So, E10 is it's a great fuel. It's what you use every day, and if you don't use it, you're going to be paying a lot more because we help make that fuel more affordable and add octane to it. But there are and the two primary blends that you're going to see is 15% ethanol. It's called E15 or unleaded 88. For our conversation here, I'll call it E15. And then you have 85% ethanol, which is called E85 typically. And E15, it can be used in any vehicle 2001 and newer. The EPA cut off testing at 2001 because just there were so few vehicles on the road, less than
Mm.
2001, where it would have been cost prohibitive. So that's where that random number comes from. It's not like if you have a vehicle made in the year 2000, it's going to be
It's going to break down.
disastrous. Yeah, certainly not the case. It's just where the testing stopped. And then E85 can be used in a flex fuel vehicle. Um, Kind of note in the California market, which has about 40 million people living there, E85 has really taken on a lot of just a lot of notoriety. It's significantly less expensive.
Mm.
As you know, the gasoline there is very expensive, and it can be up to a few dollars cheaper per gallon.
Wow.
Same quality or better quality actually. And then E15 anywhere USA is typically 10 to 20 cents per gallon less expensive, and that's because we're just a more economic value for octane.
Hmm. And is that the same in Canada as well? Do you know what blends they're using in Canada? You said they're our largest partner when it comes to exports.
Yeah, so I know for a number of years they had 5%, and then they're on 10%, and then they also have a clean fuel standard that
Okay.
is a Canadian national standard. And so, well, I don't know specifically what's that going to mean. I believe there's a lot of room to drive higher blends there. There's a lot of plants in the Corn Belt, mine included, that could reach Canada via rail. We have very good rail interchangeability through our two countries. So I believe they're going to continue to blend more ethanol over time as a part of their fuel.
Hmm. And how does that happen? We're at E10, you see E15 starting to come into the market. How did we begin to grow the volumes of bioethanol in our fuel that we see today? Can you give us a little history on how we even started using
Yeah,
bioethanol in our fuel?
certainly. So it's been a long history, and we've been using alcohol as a potential fuel for a long time, and Henry Ford looked at it, but kind of as we know ethanol today, and starting to use larger quantity, the story really begins, as we know, in the late 70s and 80s. The EPA allowed 10% ethanol as a blend stock. And, some of the early producers were, farmers, agricultural co-ops, large agricultural companies, policymakers, and then just dreamers. And, these guys and gals they were the pioneers in the industry, and they basically saw ethanol production as a case for both energy security, a value add to agriculture, and
Mm.
a way to get octane in the fuel. Um, the late 80s and 90s saw air quality become an issue that we needed to tackle in communities across America. And so higher quality fuel became a solution to that. And so oxygenates were used. Um, Ethanol is a great octane booster. And so what happened is ethanol it had a little bit of growth, but then in the early 2000s and late 90s, states began to ban MTBE,
Mm.
which was a blend stock. And once they banned that, that's where we really saw, our growth happen. And so from 2000 to 2010, you saw MTBE being banned, the renewable fuel standard to start blending fuel. And then in the RFS2 or Renewable Fuel Standard 2 in 2007, it was noted for both for energy security. So that's where
Mm.
that was just a catalyst that made our industry boom. And so, energy security, octane, and animal feed, have really propelled us to where we are today with more than 200 facilities here in the United States and also several in Canada.
Yeah, and we're seeing that capacity continue to expand because there are just continued markets for bioethanol to feed into, including one in the US where we're increasing volumes in our transportation fuel.
Definitely. E15 would be great, and it's here, and um, we just want to keep competing, and we want to be an economic and efficient solution to, the transportation sector.
Yeah, and a cleaner solution, right? Because you're replacing other blending components in traditional gasoline that could be really harmful or even cancer causing.
Definitely, yeah. With replacing those oxygenants with alcohol, it's a no-brainer. And it's also a win for our whole domestic energy industry as well. The oil and gas industry can take gasoline and blend it with ethanol and have a really clean fuel, and
Hmm.
it's good for us.
Yeah, where do you think the future of bioethanol lies for North America? Like, let's say the next 20 years.
Yeah, so we have a great roadmap ahead. Liquid fuels in general, I mean, that's where our major market is today. I believe in liquid fuels. They're going to be here for a long time. It's just the most affordable and economic way to utilize a BTU of energy in the transportation sector. So as we continue to increase blends of ethanol with gasoline, that's just there's a great pathway forward. And then also, you look at other uses, and sustainable aviation fuel is exciting. I think we have
Hmm.
some work to do, including getting our policymakers to recognize the low carbon attributes of our product and
Hmm.
actually account for them appropriately. And you can type in a search on sustainable aviation fuel and get 100 articles on this, but just being treated fairly for what we actually are. But also bioproducts, as part of the bioeconomy, and then just continued expanded use of our co-products in high protein feed. Those are the areas that excite me. But bottom line, it just comes down to with what we can do to add the liquid fuel to make them, more environmentally friendly and economic. There's just no other substitute that comes close in efficiency, affordability, and dispatchability, the ability to use that energy at any given time. So
Hmm.
I'm excited about the next 20 years and beyond.
So you think in 20 years, maybe E15, it's not even going to register because it's just going to be everywhere. It's going to be commonplace.
I hope it'll look just like E10 does to us today.
Yeah.
Um, but we've been fighting that fight for a long time. But in my mind, it's a no-brainer to use E15. It's a great fuel, it's affordable, and it works in every vehicle that you're going to see today.
Well, bioethanol for cooking isn't your focus, but I'm going to shift just a little bit because you are actually familiar with the cooking challenges around the world prior to your introduction to Pivot. You served in the military. Thank you very much for your service. You were flying helicopters. And what did you notice about the communities that you were in while you were overseas?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, in the Army, and I flew Black Hawk helicopters, and so I did deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. Afghanistan was my second deployment, and it really hit me there because Afghanistan has four seasons, just like the United
Hmm.
States. And I was in eastern Afghanistan near Kabul, and when we go to fly into Kabul in the wintertime, it would be, a perfectly clear blue sky, and you would get over the city of Kabul and it would be socked in with
Hmm.
just this layer. It looked like clouds, but it was really pollution. And
Yeah.
um, at first I thought, what is this? Why is it socked in? It was tough to get in there. Sometimes you couldn't even fly in. But then when I started looking into it, I realized it was pollution from cooking, using biomass and that to cook, burning trash and other biomass
Hmm.
for heat, and then also old vehicles of poor quality fuel.
Hmm.
And in the summer months, you're really not going to see it because the air is going to be able to dissipate and go away. But in the winter, I did not know this at the time. It's something called a thermal inversion, and it basically keeps the air close to the ground, and
Hmm.
you really see the effects of what that pollution is. So
Yeah.
um, it made me realize two things. One, uh, I'm really lucky to live in the United States of America and have these, just regular heat and clean cooking that's there. But also, there's a lot of places in the world that are struggling And so finding ways to be able to cook and heat your home is still a big problem across the world.
Yeah, and as you know, Pivot's trying to open up access to cleaner fuels to help alleviate this problem. Do you think that the expertise in the US transportation industry around bioethanol can benefit the clean cooking industry as well?
For sure. I think it was maybe in 2015 or 16, and I actually saw a presentation that Poet did on the cooking stoves, and then coupling that with what I knew from my time in Afghanistan. I thought, man, this is a great idea.
Hmm.
But but as Americans and just as people in the ethanol industry globally, we are experts at creating markets efficiently and economically. So
Hmm.
I think the big difference with clean cooking is going to be your logistics and especially the last mile logistics. Because while we can sell tanker trucks and rail cars full of fuel, clean cooking has to eventually break that down into smaller batches.
Hmm.
So I think our expertise can help drive maybe a further systemization and creating a little more of a market and find efficient ways to get those last mile logistics conquered.
Yeah.
But then also, there is a humanitarian aspect to this. And so, market-based approaches only be able to do so much. I think without NGOs like Pivot, we won't be able to do it. But I think by you guys leading the way and creating these processes, then businesses and markets will be able to be developed to maybe deploy this clean cooking fuel more readily.
Hmm. Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing that happen, and we're seeing it happen. And it's been great to partner with the bioethanol industry um, to get some of those initial steps moving forward. There's a lot of knowledge sharing, a lot of technical assistance, and a lot of people that are willing to devote their time and energy to it. And so that's been really exciting.
Yeah, it's a great cause, and I commend you for doing it. And I think I met you at a meeting a couple years ago, and shortly thereafter, our trade association, the state of Nebraska, Renewable Fuels Nebraska, we saw what you were up to and really got behind it. And I know we've
Hmm.
supported. It's really fantastic what you're doing.
Yeah, RFN's been a great support and are always sharing about the story as well. So we're really grateful for partners like that.
Thank you.
Last question, which is still focused on cooking, because I ask everybody a cooking question. If you could only cook one thing for the rest of your life, I don't even know if you cook, but if you do, or if you could, what would you cook and how would you cook it?
It's a really tough question. I can cook. I'm not great, but I can do some stuff. I'm better at grilling. I don't miss too many meals, but if I could only cook one thing for the rest of my life, I'd probably grill sirloin steaks on my grill at
Ooh,
home. So that'd be my one food, I think, if I
all right.
was faced with that challenge.
That's a great option, especially in Nebraska. You're going to make a lot of people happy with that answer.
Definitely.
Well, Tony, I'm so grateful for your time today and sharing your expertise from a very personal level on the bioethanol story here in North America and helping to round out our trip around the globe and talk a little bit about the volumes, the feedstock, the policies that are present here in the US.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate everything that you're doing. And this is a great industry to be a part of. And if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out to myself or any others. And we love to tell our story. And thank you for helping to tell our story. And
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Tony.